Before Swarm of the Century, we had certainly seen many of Pinkie's antics that didn't make much sense. But they were always little things here and there that didn't actually drive the plot forward. In this episode, we see Pinkie continually not making sense throughout most of the story. We can see that she's trying to do something that seems important, but we really don't understand why. We may get the sense that Pinkie is onto something with her strange behaviors, but we can't see her way of thinking until the very end. Which makes for an interesting story that seems a little different from most everything else in MLP. As the episode begins, we see that Fluttershy is collecting flowers for the arrival of Princess Celestia. Considering how many other ponies there are that already have cutie marks having to do with flowers, I have to wonder why Fluttershy is doing this kind of work. Shouldn't she be preparing her animals for a musical number like she did in the first episode? Seems like that would be a better use of her natural gifts. When we get our first look at a parasprite, it certainly seems harmless enough. Fluttershy is quickly overtaken by its cuteness, despite the fact that it consumes an entire bucket of apples several times larger than its own body. And she even allows it to nestle in her hair. Not something that I would ever allow in my hair, but moving on. Twilight is going through her normal bits of over-preparing for the arrival of Princess Celestia. Spike seems a little annoyed by the fact that Twilight keeps reading through her books but doesn't end up putting them back, which seems a bit unlike her, considering how organized she usually is. But perhaps she had another one of those all-night study sessions that she tends to have. We then see Twilight going around town checking on the rest of the preparations, and she is impressed with what she sees. At least, for the most part. When she comes to Sugar Cube Corner, we see that Pinkie is having trouble keeping herself from sampling all of the creations. You'd think that she'd be able to restrain herself, considering that these are supposed to be for Princess Celestia's arrival. And come to think of it, this is almost the opposite from what we see from Pinkie much later on in the series during Mystery on the Friendship Express. When Twilight starts complaining, Pinkie comes up with the excuse that she is tasting them to make sure that they are worthy of royalty, which really doesn't hold up considering that she's eating an entire cake whole. When Fluttershy arrives to tell them about the parasprite, she actually stops herself when she gets the slightest hint that she might be interrupting. And we are all surprised when 3 parasprites suddenly appear. But they continue to impress as Twilight is instantly smitten when she sees them. But Pinkie is actually disgusted with them, and seems to be the only one who actually knows what they are. Which raises a very interesting question about where Pinkie was able to acquire this unique bit of knowledge. And the first thing that Pinkie does is to go off and find a trombone, which of course confuses her friends as well as the audience. But at this point in the story, it is easy for us to simply brush off her antics as Pinkie just being Pinkie. In the next scene, Rarity is attempting to work on a dress ensemble that Rainbow is wearing. Just how Rarity was able to convince Rainbow to do this kind of thing in the first place is quite the mystery. We can immediately tell that Rainbow would rather be doing just about anything else right now. Even for Princess Celestia, I have a very hard time believing that Rainbow would ever want to wear something like this. When Twilight presents the parasprite to them, once again it seems to have multiplied. But both Rarity and Rainbow are instantly smitten by their cuteness. We even see Rainbow being affectionate towards her parasprite, which seems a little unlike her. Perhaps the parasprites have a bit of magic of their own that causes anyone nearby to instantly want one. When Twilight returns home, we see that Spike had actually done a really good job on cleaning up the library. Even though we saw him being less than pleasant about it earlier, he did end up doing more than his fair share of work. And despite her feeling the need to be in control of everything, Twilight is actually able to put aside her paranoia on the preparations and calm herself for the night. That is, until she awakes the next morning and discovers several dozen parasprites all over the library. I really like all the chaos that the animators have thrown in here. They got really creative with everything that is moving around all at once. And even the music they put in here really fits with the situation. When I'm rewatching all of these old episodes, I keep finding new ways to appreciate them, and the background music continues to be a great aspect of the show that I am enjoying all the more. Then we come to Rainbow Dash and her home, which actually looks different from how it is at the end of Read It and Weep. Or maybe this scene is just all on the outside of her house. When the parasprites start swarming around her, Rainbow is no longer smitten with how they look and is actually repulsed by their touch. And again, the animators come up with some creative ways for the parasprites to spread their own brand of chaos. When we come to Rarity, though, she seems to have them all under her complete control, as they are helping her to do the work at the boutique. And Rarity is enjoying their presence, until one of them hacks up a glob of goop onto Rarity, which quickly becomes another parasprite. And all that cute and adorable talk from Rarity earlier on quickly goes to gross, gross, gross. Once again, we see that whatever effect the parasprites had on the ponies has worn off. But we do see that Rarity does manage to collect them all in her saddlebags when Pinkie arrives trying to find more instruments. Pinkie is trying to convince Rarity to help her, but Rarity quickly brushes her off. When everyone arrives at Fluttershy's house, we see that the parasprites are now even beyond the hundreds in number. But Applejack is actually able to corral them all quite quickly, and for the briefest of moments it seems like all the parasprites have been put into the Everfree Forest. Except for the fact that Fluttershy kept one for herself, causing the problems to begin all over again. Rainbow is able to pull together an impressive tornado all on her own, and once again it seems like they can get things under control. Until Pinkie arrives with her cymbals, which get caught up in the tornado and cause Rainbow to lose control. When Rainbow cries out, "She's breaking up, I can't hold it," it sounds very much like a Star Trek reference, and given the fact that the parasprites seem rather similar to Tribbles, that just adds all the more enjoyment to the reference. Everyone seems to have reached their limit with Pinkie, despite the fact that Pinkie is still trying to convince them that what she is doing is important. Even Applejack thinks that Pinkie is a few apples short of a bushel. By this point, the parasprites are all over Ponyville, eating any food in sight. Twilight comes up with the idea to cast a spell so that the parasprites won't eat any more food, which seems rather puzzling to me. This seems like some form of mind control. I mean, why would Twilight know a spell like that? What other purpose does that serve? But even though the idea seems sound, the parasprites just start eating everything else in sight, right down to the buildings themselves. Rarity rushes to her shop to try and stop the parasprites from devouring her dresses, but she really doesn't have any means to keep them from destroying everything in the shop. Which leads to a rather funny bit with Pinkie looking like she's come to save the day and only comes in to pick up another instrument. Which leads to Rarity's first true freak-out in the series. When Twilight comes back to the library, she sees the parasprites eating the words right out of her books. Which reminds me of another being of chaos that ended up doing the exact same thing much later on in the series. Could it be that there might be some kind of connection between the parasprites and Discord? I mean, these pests seem like just the kind of thing that Discord would come up with to spread his chaos. I know he was still imprisoned in stone at this point in the series, but the thought still makes me rather curious. Twilight grabs one of the parasprites and brings it to Zecora. Despite the fact that Zecora can instantly tell what it is, she has no helpful advice on what to do about them, other than saying, "You're doomed." When Twilight arrives back in Ponyville, we see her first mental break, right down to convincing herself that rebuilding Ponyville from scratch is the best possible solution to their problems. All hope seems lost when Pinkie arrives playing several instruments at once, which ends up drawing all the parasprites to the Everfree Forest. And when Princess Celestia arrives, she also seems to think that the parasprites are adorable, which still leads me to think that the parasprites have some kind of magical effect on ponies when they are first seen. And the fact that even Celestia doesn't seem to know what they are is also rather confusing. Where did these things come from? Seriously, I'm racking my brain trying to figure this out. Still, Swarm of the Century presents some clever comedic bits, some impressive amounts of animation, and even a bit of a thought-provoking lesson. It can be rather easy to dismiss an idea just because it sounds strange, or even to brush aside a friend just because their ideas were less than worthwhile in the past. But if nothing else, Swarm of the Century actually encourages us to think outside the box. And if there is any character that thinks outside the box, it's Pinkie Pie. What are your thoughts about Swarm of the Century? Do you have any ideas on where the parasprites might have come from? Could Celestia really not have known anything about parasprites, considering her parting words with Twilight? I would like to hear your thoughts about Swarm of the Century, and here's to hoping that we can figure out a few more mysteries with MLP. I am Dr. Wolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.